Welcome to Rooted in the Caribbean, a Women in Leadership series. Today, my guest is Nina Stock. Nina often jokes that her very existence is due to NHS overseas recruitment, being born of an Indian registrar and a British nurse. Nina was born the middle of three girls in 1976, and her parents never saw anything as a barrier. They encouraged her and her sisters to pursue education. Nina's parents heavily influenced her approach to life, both instilling in her a philanthropic approach. And Nina remembers in the earlys, during the miners' strikes, her mom gathering donations of baby clothes and equipment that her dad then delivered to the health visitors in the mining communities. Nina went on to study for a BSc Hons in psychology in Plymouth, and then to Bristol, where she graduated with an MSc in health psychology. Nina's management style has been influenced by wanting the best out of people around her and wanting to persuade anyone to come along with her on this journey that she has. Nina started her career as a Band 5 audit facilitator in the local mental health trust, and over the last 24 years has held various operational appointments across UHBW and NBT. She is currently the Director of Pathology at North Bristol Trust, where she leads a team of 900 staff, including biomedical scientists, doctors, healthcare scientists, managers, and support staff. Nina is a strong advocate for those wishing to further their career and has mentored on the Stepping Up program, and more recently has taken on a mentorship role as part of a reciprocal scheme between the MOD and the NHS. Nina believes in supporting mentees to be brave in challenging the status quo and creating their own success. Nina is happily married to Nick, and they share a 23-year-old son and two daughters aged 14 and 10. Welcome, Nina. Hello and welcome to Rooted in the Caribbean, our Woman in Leadership series. And today my guest is Nina Stock. Nina and our friendship began in the middle of the pandemic. We became a bubble working together at North Bristol Trust. So Nina, welcome. I am so happy to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. A little bit nervous, my first ever podcast, but...
Don't be nervous. So Nina, first question I ask everyone is, tell us about your roots.
Okay, so it all started in South Wales, which I know is quite unusual, particularly considering my dad ended up there having moved to the UK from India. So he first came here in the late 1960s. He was a doctor. Ophthalmologist, so he was here living and working with some friends. From what I can gather from the stories, having an absolutely fantastic time. No intention to settle, and then he met my mum, who was a student nurse in the same hospital. Yeah, so they met, I think, with my mum making up the numbers at a sort of double date, and then it kind of went on from there. And in 1970 he was challenged by his father, who said, if you truly love her, you'll be on the next flight back to the UK and you'll propose. And he did. And yeah, they married 6 weeks later, which obviously got all of the tongues wagging locally where my mum lived.
And your mom is from Wales?
No, my mum's from Birmingham, but they met at a hospital in Wales, in North Wales, and they married in Birmingham. And there's a fantastic story about how my dad was late because the best man was in a different car and he got lost, so they were following the best man to try and bring him back. So when my dad finally arrived, everyone had thought that he'd left her at the altar.
Bless her.
Yeah,
but
luckily not.
That wasn't the case.
No.
Amazing.
And then, so then they moved to South Wales for work and settled in a small village, which is quite unusual. We were probably, there was us, there was the two families that ran the Chinese takeaways, and another Indian doctor's family. We made up the diversity of the local population. And yeah, it was not a unique village in those days, but pretty much everyone was related to everyone else.
Right.
by some way. And however, it was incredibly welcoming, and we always felt part of the wider community. And my mum, having quite a strong faith, she went to the local church, and we followed suit. And so we turned up at everything. And my dad was always helped out at all the church fetes and bazaars, and yeah, which was very popular in the 1980s. 1980s UK was all about getting the bunting out, and despite the weather, being outdoors trying to raise money for things.
I would explain why I've been to your house and you barbecued in the rain.
Oh yeah, 100%. It didn't matter what the weather was doing. You know, there was no such thing as moving it indoors. We just got on with it, and you wore a coat.
Wow. So I know you're one of three girls. Were you all born in Wales?
We were, so all three of us. My elder sister is 3 years older than me, but we were all born in the same tiny cottage hospital called Panteg, and there was a big maternity unit there. It had been various things over the years, but it started life as a workhouse. So originally it was where the poor were housed, and I think it had quite a dark past in that respect. And the other claim to fame, it was also used as the set for a comedy murder show called Murder Most Horrid. So Dawn French came and filmed an episode of that there.
Wow.
And it's still there now. It's a mental health hospital now and some care of the elderly units. But the maternity unit moved out a long time ago. So all three of us were born in that tiny hospital, and I think created quite a stir for being the first babies ever born there with brown eyes.
Wow. Okay. But the thing is, Nina, when I look at you, immediately you can't see your diversity, but I know how passionate you are about Indian culture and how many times you've visited India. And so, how do you think that upbringing and that childhood has influenced the type of woman in leadership that you are?
I think it's influenced it a lot. I think I have a really great understanding of people from all backgrounds. So I think on the one hand, my dad was a doctor, so we had a very privileged upbringing. But on the other hand, you know, South Wales is amongst the most deprived parts of the UK. And so, whilst it had a great community feel, you know, there was very much a knowledge that there was a lot of hardship that went on. And I think as well in the early 80s there was the miners' strikes, which I think most people had seen on TV, but there's something about when you live very close to where all of that was actually taking place, and the kind of I'm very left, and I think a lot of it comes from there was very much that feeling of that political landscape when I was in my very influential years. And I think as well, some of the things that are uniquely Welsh and are uniquely tragic. So I don't know whether you've ever heard of the Aberfan disaster, but that happened, I think it was not all that long before I was born. And that was where the waste material from the coal mines was all piled up, and it gave way and came down the hill and engulfed some houses and a school.
Wow.
And it was really the start of health and safety came from that. How much Wales changed then over the time when I was little, from when I was very little, so much of it was just black, and mining was everywhere. And then as a result of that disaster, they realised they had to plant trees and grass.
Right.
And it's so different now. Now it probably looks the way it did before mining started, whereas for a long time it was very industrial and felt very bleak.
Oh.
And so I think it's when you're in a leadership position, there is something that is great about being to understand the different backgrounds that people come from, but also being able to communicate with people in a way that works for them, and how that can be different depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And would you say that in your career to date, you've been allowed to really showcase the impact that diversity that you bring has?
Probably not until quite recently. I think whether I was allowed or not, I think there was very much when I was younger. I think when I was early in my career, I perhaps didn't make it, wasn't as proud or as open about my heritage. I have a very British sounding first name, very British sounding middle name. My last name was Som before I married, which is fairly unique. There was only 5 of us in the country. I changed my name because I very much wanted to have the same name as my children, but equally I'm aware that did take quite a bit of that kind of identity, or even people asking, where's that name from? It's very unusual, went away. But I think now I feel that I've really found that again, and I wore a sari to the staff awards last year for the first time
Wow.
ever, and that felt really kind of liberating and
And empowering.
yeah, and then I was chatting to people at the event, and I think it was really nice because it opened up that conversation again. But it was actually interesting. I met other people whose parents are from other parts of the world, but it was interesting how many of them that were of my age only speak English because their parents didn't want them to have, to have the
Of
stigma of
yeah.
yeah. And so we're the kind of generation that almost it was concealed wherever possible.
Hmm.
And
That is so true. So, so your dad never spoke to you in what was his native
Bengali.
language?
So he
Okay.
spoke Bengali. No, so I understand bits of it, probably more than I ever realised. And they often will use English words if they don't have a word for it in Bengali. So you
Right.
can roughly get the idea of what was being spoken about. But no, he decided that he felt he didn't want us all to be able to speak a language my mum couldn't. But at the same time, she probably would have learnt at the same time if we'd all spoken it. So yeah, it is a frustration that I can't speak Bengali because I think it does then separate you off from the rest of that community. And also,
So
I think
it's
being
good. I was gonna say it's good that though to have those roots and that heritage, because I remember looking at an album where you had tons of photos going back as a teenager and as a young adult, and you really embrace that fully, like going without your dad even.
oh yeah, so I've been to India twice, once with my older sister and then once with a friend, and just went and travelled around. And I think it was fantastic. And I think youth helps, doesn't it? So I think when you're young, you're afraid of nothing and you just get on and do. And we did have an amazing time. There's no doubt about it. But I think now I wish I could speak the language because I think there's something about that ability to show respect for an area if you can, meet them in the middle at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah. But you said you recognize more than you give yourself credit for. So, I mean, it might only take a conversation or a couple conversations with someone whose native language is Bengali to trigger that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I think because my dad did speak a different language, I've always been very good at listening to anyone speaking any language and picking out and getting meaning from the conversation. So whenever we're on holiday, because I have dark hair and, dark skin and usually get a tan while I'm away, wherever we go, people think I'm from there and will speak to me in whichever language it is. So I've got really good over the years at listening and then being able to respond.
Yeah.
And then it's really interesting because I can often understand what they're saying to me, but I couldn't begin to reply in their language. But I often
Right.
find that when you do try and understand, people are generally better at then they'll talk, they'll meet you in the middle, even if they wouldn't
Yeah.
normally.
Yeah, they feel like you are at least making an effort to embrace what's uniquely theirs. Wow. So one of the other things I know about you, Nina, is that you and your husband, when you got married, you honeymoon in St. Lucia. What took you to St. Lucia?
So I have to admit, I love the Caribbean. I was lucky enough, I went for the first time to Barbados when I was 15 on a school trip, which is quite a unique school trip, but not one that I know many people get the opportunity. So I played hockey. There was an international hockey festival being hosted in Barbados, and the school I was at and another school, we fundraised, and the two girls' teams, we all flew out. We didn't take part in the festival because you had to be your national team, but it was incredible because we were on the same flight out as the men's England hockey team, and they were brilliant, and they let us go and sit with them in the stadium to watch the game, and we we also at the opening ceremony got to carry the Welsh flag because the Welsh team hadn't qualified. So it kind of, my love affair with the Caribbean started from there. I just enjoyed that 2 weeks so much. And so any opportunity to go back. So when we were getting married and we knew we were going to blow the budget on the honeymoon, I immediately said we have to go to the Caribbean. And luckily, Nick agreed. And so, yeah, we booked 17 nights in St. Lucia.
17.
It was, yeah, to this day, probably the best holiday I've ever been on. Just such amazing people. We met so many lovely people, and just such an interesting and beautiful place because the history, whilst obviously having an incredibly dark side to it, is also the history of people who've overcome and taken back control of their lives. So I think wherever you go, whenever you go there, you can't help but I know, it really feels like somewhere that is just really welcoming and just a great place to go. And obviously there's lots of rum, which
Let's just cut to the chase. Yeah. Yeah. Nina, one of the things that I really admire about you, having worked with you for this is what, almost 5 years that we've known each other. One of the things that I really admire about you is your ability to elevate women around you. Like I've seen you work with, there was that point where you had total responsibility for the mortuary and you were supporting some of the young women there and coaching, and I know you do work with the Aspire program as well. What has been your, I guess, impetus for doing that?
I think it's that understanding of how hard it is. Whilst I've done incredibly well in my career, I'm very aware that it is so much harder to build a network and to build the contacts that you need to succeed as a woman. And and I think particularly as a woman of colour, I think it is the toughest out there. But I think it's often women who are, we have the chief caring responsibility if there are children. And it is much harder to navigate a career around not being able to work, the full standard hours and doing all of those things. And it can equally be very hard to get doors to open for you because people will make assumptions about you before they even meet you. And so I have always enjoyed helping others, and it started completely almost by accident and organically, where there was just people in my team who I helped and didn't realise that I was coaching and mentoring them. I just saw it as encouragement, and then I think after I'd really thought about it and realised what it was and how much I got out of it, how amazing it is to see other people be able to achieve what they want to achieve because you've been able to really just point them in the right direction rather than opening doors for them, because that's not always what people need. Often they need to open the door inside themselves that says, I can do this and I'm actually going to go out there and take the risk that will get me what I want. More recently, there was a lady I worked with from the local mental health trust, and she had this incredible idea, and she was very much like, she was sort of like, I'm looking for a job that will allow me to do this. And I went, well, what if it doesn't exist? And what if you need to convince them that you doing this will be good for them?
Right.
And she'd not really thought of it. She'd been basically looking for a job. Anyway, the long and the short of it is she put a proposal together and they now pay her 2 days a week to do the job that she's always wanted. They
She
put her
created it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that will always work, but I think that there are times when clearly what she wanted was to develop an idea and sell it, and that's what I was able to kind of help her to do, but not with really me needing to do anything. And I think there's something about as well when women talk to other women who have been there and gone through it, I think that's much easier for them to then, feel confident to be able to do it.
Yeah, and there's this recognition that you're not alone because as you described it, being a woman, diverse woman, can be a lonely space to navigate. So, knowing that there are others who've traveled that path and who can help you reach your potential, as you've said, is really empowering in itself and less isolated. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, it's like reminding people of their own self-worth and the fact that other people do want to hear them.
Yeah, Because that example that you gave, she may have still been looking to find that ideal niche role and not even considered that she needed to create the change that she wanted to see. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. So I know you're a mom of two girls and you have a bonus son as well. But as a mom of daughters, what are the things that you've navigated in your career to date that you're hoping they can avoid?
I think it's the feeling of not fitting in. I think
Hmm.
not that it was that I necessarily didn't. I think as a woman particularly, it's quite hard to feel that you belong. And I think particularly I found as a diverse woman, and especially being pretty much the only one, up until we shared an office, and unfortunately in the NHS that continues to be an issue in that I'm the first woman to hold my current role, first non-scientist, and definitely the first person of colour. So it's
Wow.
yeah, and this is 2025, so you wouldn't think that that would still be the case. So I hope that they don't have to break down as many barriers as our generation has, and I hope that things are more. I think it's. I don't know what the right word to describe it. It's more open and I think more welcoming to everyone from all backgrounds.
Yeah. That the word inclusive means what it actually says.
And that I suppose it's not that we'll ever get to this. Well, in my lifetime, I'm not convinced we'll ever get to a fully inclusive, worldwide society where everyone is something a bit like out of Star Trek, where it's just all one group of people. Yeah, that will eventually happen, but I don't think it's going to be yet. But I would like to see that there is just way more, equality and inclusion, and that isn't still something that people say they do but don't actually do.
Yeah. And I shouldn't say how would you, but how have you made your work environment, the space that you have authority over, more inclusive?
So well, we're taking baby steps, but we are definitely making sure that we are reducing the bias in the way that we interview people, in the way that we shortlist people. We are pushing, although your name doesn't appear on the application, the year that you did your qualifications does also
And
place.
where and
Yeah. So you can automatically calculate how old someone is based on when they did certain qualifications. And you can also tell where someone was born based roughly on where they got their qualifications. And so I would like to see us being much more, take all of that out. That is something that should be checked by HR. The bit that we need to think about is, do they have the qualifications, yes or no? And then what's their most recent work history? And if they haven't, if they haven't had a great deal of work history, because this is very early in their career, that shouldn't count against you either. There should be options where you can add, information about other things that you've done. So I think I'd like to see that. For me, recruitment is the biggest challenge and biggest barrier, I think, for most people still. And I think the reason why you see all white, all male boards still is because there's not enough people feeding up. So until you've got it, so there's diversity at every single level of an organisation, you will constantly be able to say, but we appointed who applied for the job.
that is very true. That is true. How would those around you describe your leadership style?
I'd like to think they would describe me as compassionate, but equally, I am very aware that there's probably a few people that might describe me as a little bit scary. I think that I definitely try to be firm but fair, but equally I am aware that I can stand my ground. I am very resilient and willing to stand my ground on issues that I'm really passionate about and really think should happen. I'm very keen to develop people. I'm very keen to see people's potential and encourage them to go further. Equally, I'm very able to tell people where I feel they're not showing their true potential, and that then there needs to be a dramatic change in order for the things to get better.
Yeah,
I don't shy away from the difficult
the
conversations.
difficult. And going back to that comment you made with respect to you hold a role now as director of pathology
Is that the
That's
right
right.
title? Right. You made the comment about being first female, first non-scientist, and first diverse person. That is huge. That's phenomenal. How has that impacted conferences or conversations online with your peers? Does it shake up the conversation?
It does. I do think that I feel a little bit sometimes like I'm a hand grenade someone's dropped in. and, and I sort of arrive at things, and I love clothes and I love wearing really bold patterns.
Yeah.
And I'm quite a tall woman as well, and so when I arrive in a room, people often know I've arrived in the room. And I think that pathology in general is not hasn't quite moved with the times in as much as other things, and so I think there's still a lot of people who are quite happy their job involves them sitting in a quite a dark office and not really ever having to talk to anyone. So I
Yeah.
think I am quite a big splash of colour into what was an otherwise. However, I say that I also think there's a lot of people who are really pleased about that, as well as there are people who aren't sure what they think about that as well. So it's not that they particularly mind, they're just sort of like, oh, okay, this is very different to what we've been used to.
No.
But I definitely think I can see a shift, because when I joined North Bristol Trust in 2020, the entire management team for pathology were men, and now all but one is female. So
Wow. That is phenomenal.
it is. And yeah, and in terms of diversity as well, there is another manager from an Asian background. So, things have changed in actually what is really a short period of time. And I'm hoping that as the sort of next generation come through, because I've currently got quite a lot of people who are preparing for retirement and have all trained together and worked together for 40 years. And so I think there's a whole new group of managers that are coming through who have got, are going to bring their own stamp to how we do things, which I think is going to be a really interesting time, because I think it is going to change the establishment quite a lot.
Yeah. No, it definitely sounds that way. And in such a short space of time to completely turn that on its head is amazing. And you and I both have experienced really strong leadership from other women at North Bristol, so including Sarah. And how do you think that is going to change the landscape of leadership across Bristol?
I think there's going to be a much stronger representation across the NHS, from women at senior levels. I think it used to be that traditionally women sort of got to a certain point and then had children, and then that was kind of, they did the juggle, but then pretty much stayed at the same level for a really long time. And I think it was traditionally seen that if you went into one of the more senior roles, then you were willing to sacrifice quite a lot of your time. So it was always seen as not something that people wanted to do. So I'm hoping that by seeing more and more women, flourishing in those roles, it'll break down some of that myth of, if I go for that, how will I do it?
Balance. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope to see as well that there are more women where, they're not taking the full brunt of the childcare responsibilities.
Yeah, because it really is a sacrifice, not just in terms of giving up that time with your children, but you have this sense of guilt, this sense of, that it's wrong. I don't think that our male counterparts feel that same level of guilt.
No, nor are they made to. I think there's an element of, if a man takes time off to look after children, it's seen as like, oh wow, that's amazing, isn't he such a great dad? Whereas a woman doing the same thing, it's just expected that that's what we would do. We would take time off, and I hope that over time that will change. That actually both parents have equal responsibility,
Mm.
and we shouldn't feel the guilt. So it's around, acknowledging some of us, not all of us, some of us who want to get back into work, that's okay. I remember when I was on maternity leave the second time, and I did find it particularly lonely. I didn't have many friends who'd had a second child at the same time as I'd had mine, and I struggled with joining the new groups, because by that point I was a more mature mother, I will call it. So if meeting up with people who were on their first baby, there was quite a big age difference. And I did miss work. I'm not going to lie. I missed work. Actually, I was quite relieved when I got to the stage that I could go back to work. And she wasn't very old where we made the decision that I would go full time again. So I went back 4 days a week initially. And then when she was 18 months old, I went back full time. And Nick so he went part time and he did the bulk of the childcare. And then in lockdown, he decided he would become a full-time stay-at-home dad, and so that has enabled me, I think, to take on roles since then that I would have really struggled to do if I was, the main responsible person in terms of childcare. Most recent role before this one was in medicine division, and it is known as it's very punishing. I mean, it was 50-hour weeks, and that was even in the summer when it was meant to be quiet, and getting into work for not long after 7 in the morning because we had an 8 a.m. huddle every day. So these are jobs that are very hard to do when you've got a young family, and I'm not saying that you should have to give up all of that, but equally the guilt that you were talking about goes both ways. And so some jobs you feel guilty when you're at work that you're not with your family, and then you feel guilty when you're with your family because you're not at work. Whereas I think the job I'm in now, I'm able to find a much better work-life balance, and I think it's enabled me to be in a much more, I'm no longer the doer, I'm the strategic decision maker, which is exactly what I need right now.
Yeah. Wow. That's a real full circle journey, because I know that often we're aiming for that. What you just described, this strategic decision maker. That's like the aim of so many of us. We really struggle. And even when it says it on the tin, when you get into it, you find yourself doing all of the operational stuff. So to have made that transition and that leap must be really gratifying.
Completely. I think I talk about it. I mean, I'm 4 months in now, and I joke that I'm still in the honeymoon period. But actually, I'm not sure I am so much. I think that I'm lucky that I've got an incredible management team, an incredible team of clinicians, all of whom are absolute experts in all that they do. And so I'm finally in a position where I'm helping them, I'm giving them the direction I want them to go in, but I'm not actually having to do that for them. And I think having come from a role that was just so very operational to the point where, I would be in ED most days, to the point where I'd often be pushing beds up to wards. Yeah. To then come out of that into something where I'm truly a director has been life-changing for me. I'm very glad I had the experience of my previous role, because without that knowledge of how all of that works, I think I'd struggle in my current role to be able to support everyone and for them
As effectively.
and to be able to link them up with the right other people. Because we can become a bit of an island. Pathology is one of those areas that most people know about, but don't really know what we do or what goes on behind that, mysterious front door.
It's a really nice building, though. I will say
It
that.
is.
I guess one of the things that I'm curious about, again, as a mom of girls, what's the legacy that you want to pass on to them as they step into their careers later on in life?
I think I want them to know they really can do anything that they want to do, and they really can break down any barrier that people put in their way. It may not be through the most obvious route, but you really can. I mean, I think my greatest advice I ever got was weirdly from two men. So it was, my dad was one of them, who absolutely said, never let being a woman hold you back. He was, we used to joke that I was his only son. I was an enormous tomboy, and there was a phase where I think some of his friends thought I was called Neil.
Oh,
But that was kind of all joking aside. He always said, do whatever you want to do. And I think the other great advice he told me was never rely on a man to make you happy. He was very much, happiness is for you to find for yourself, and shouldn't be linked to any other person. And then the other person was my old headmaster, which I know is quite unusual. But he started at the school the same year that I did. And then I later found out his eldest daughter is exactly the same age as me. So she was born a month after me. And we worked together. So we actually ended up, she's a paediatric haematologist. So we worked together in the children's hospital and sort of reconnected with him through that. But he very much had the opinion that doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, you can go on to achieve anything you want. And I think the fact that he was one of the youngest headmasters in Wales at the time and had come from a very, humble background, and just worked hard and got through. But equally, for a man, and particularly a white man, was very aware of the fact that for some of us it was always going to be harder than it would be for others. But
especially since you described that part of South Wales as some of the most deprived areas in the UK. I understand why it was important for him to feed that positivity into you and to others, because he didn't want you to shortchange yourself.
No, and I think he very much he was very clever at that, because actually he not only mentored students, but actually he encouraged some of us as students to mentor others. So I was very much assigned, we all got to be prefects when we were in what was then year 5, now year 11. And my prefect duty was with 3 lads in my year who essentially everyone was convinced were either going to join the army or go to prison. Anyway, so we had to spend most of our lunch breaks together 5 days a week, and we talked it through, and it ended up with one of them joined the Met Police and was in the Armed Response Unit. One went on to be a funeral director, and the other one did join the army. But basically, yeah, and they'd gone from they were the one, I mean, one of them had been expelled from previous schools, and actually when he came to the school I went to, just very much the whole school ethos was around the fact that it is okay to try, and actually we will help you try. So they introduced a thing where anyone who wanted to and was capable of could do extra GCSE.
Right.
That those who perhaps felt they were less able could do fewer but concentrate on getting the ones you needed to go on to do A-levels or whatever course you needed. It was an incredibly progressive and supportive school.
I guess that goes back. You said earlier that you have found yourself mentoring people throughout your career and not recognizing that that's what it was. But when you describe your roots in that, in that school, was something that was kind of it was developed in you from a young age. Well, the equivalent to year 11, you were doing that with 3 young men your age, because they're not even like younger than you. They're your peers, and you can stand toe to toe and support them in that way. He saw, the headmaster and others would have seen that real potential in you and in others to gift you that opportunity.
Absolutely. And, I didn't realise that I was doing it back then. I just thought I was a bit mouthy and good at telling people what to do. And I think, it was years later that I realised that it's always been something that I've been good at. And I was really grateful to the school for encouraging me and putting me in the situation where I could do that.
Yeah.
I think the tough thing for me was I was voted by all the teachers to be head girl of the school, but the school governors, which are made up of parents, vetoed, and so I wasn't head girl.
Wow. So, I mean, I guess that was one of the questions I was going to ask you about disappointments. But despite that disappointment, and I know you've had disappointments in your career as well, but despite those, one of the things that I am really proud to say about you as a friend is how resilient and how determined and how your tenacity is off the chart. And that is another example where, even though the parents couldn't see what everyone else saw, you believed in yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in a way, those experiences at that age are what gave me that level of resilience. And I think had I not perhaps experienced, had I sailed through where everything had just happened as it should have done, I'm not sure I would have necessarily have had the then strength of mind to navigate a career in the NHS at a time when I really did stand out amongst my peers. So in a way, I'm very glad in some ways that happened, because I think that if you experience disappointment in a controlled environment where you have got other people there to support you and to agree that it wasn't right, that helps. I have to admit, I'm very lucky that always had friends who have been very supportive. My husband's brilliant. I think that he puts up with the fact that every time I don't get a job that I interview for, the only thing that cheers me up is watching Pretty Woman. So the poor man has seen that film about 4,000.
I didn't even know that. Oh, Nick
Yeah.
is such a sweetheart.
He is, and he probably knows the entire dialogue off by heart, I think for me, it's always been about having strategies to make yourself, to get yourself back on your feet when you need to, and in an ideal world, we'd never need to, but I think in reality, especially growing up in the 80s and the 90s in the UK, which was a very different experience to the way things are now. We had to build a level of resilience and a sort of an armour plating that allowed us to keep going. It is hard because there have been jobs which I haven't got, and I just genuinely have, it's really hard because I probably should have got them, but the world unfortunately doesn't work that way. And, as I jokingly said to someone, if I'd been born a white man, imagine where I'd be now.
This is very true. But your life wouldn't have been as wonderful and as full as it is.
Oh, absolutely not. I definitely have no desire to be a man, or and I think in my current role, I find it quite funny that I started the same day that Donald Trump was inaugurated.
Did you?
I did, and which has given me the most amazing comparison. Like every time I think, oh, I'm not doing that well, I only have to flick on the news and go, yeah, it's not that bad.
And you get instant validation.
Exactly, and it's that you have to find. For me, humour is entirely how I get through this stuff, and I think there is something about, if you can't laugh at yourself and the situation you're in, then that's when you have to worry and think, gosh, what's happened that I can't.
What's going on? Yeah, that you can't overcome that obstacle. And I guess my last question for you, Nina, you talked about, growing up in the 80s. If you could go back and tell little Nina anything, what would you say to her?
I think I'd go back and I'd say, don't worry, it will be all right. Like, you will make it and you will do what you want to do. And I think it's that you will do what you want to do, because I'm a great believer. I think you're more likely to regret the things you haven't done than the things you have done. And so whilst it is not the greatest to go all the way through a job interview process and not get the job, I'm very proud of myself that I keep doing that, because if you don't even go, you'll never know, will you?
You'll never know.
So yes.
No. And one of the things I also know about you is you lean into feedback, and I think that's a really powerful thing for young people to recognize, that it's okay to look at Pretty Woman to cheer yourself up, but after, lean into the feedback that will help you grow and help you find that space that you need to.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I recently did the Nye Bevan programme, which was recommended to me by someone I have a huge amount of respect for. And I surprised myself how much that I actually learned from doing that, and how much it rebuilt my confidence in me. I think that whenever you get that opportunity, as if someone gives you feedback and it is good feedback, and we don't take to heart the things that clearly, no one's thought through. We all get that feedback, don't take that to heart. But the actual genuine good quality advice that you are given and feedback you're given, take it on board, because it will potentially change everything for you, because it does make a difference. By doing that course, I'm pretty certain that's what got me my current job, and I'm pretty certain it's what's going to carry me onwards now, and giving me that edge. Equally, I was recommended to spend time in medicine division because that looks great on your CV, and I wasn't sure.
Leaned into that.
But now I've done it, and now I've got it on my CV. That's never coming off. And, it's taught me a lot, but also it's enabled me to build a network across my entire organisation of people who I can call upon if I need them. And I think it's that as well. I think the feedback is, you need to get yourself to a position where you can go and get feedback from the people you respect the most.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Nina, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time on your day off to meet, to discuss, to share. It's been a really enlightening conversation and I'm really grateful. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you no longer feel nervous.
I don't know. I feel great now. It's been a really enjoyable conversation.